Thank you everyone for joining. How can any lawyer work on climate? That's the question that we're here to talk about today. That's why you've shown up to be part of this. And before we get into the housekeeping and kick off the panel, introduce my esteemed panelist guests, I want to introduce myself. My name is Matt Karmel. I am the chair of the Environmental Sustainability Law Group at Offit Kurman and the founder of the Planetary Lawyer Project. Now, Offit Kurman, for those of you who don't know, is an AmLaw 200 law firm with a very broad national footprint and a very full service practice area. Our environmental sustainability law group within Offit Kurman is a diverse multidisciplinary team that combines traditional environmental expertise with cutting edge sustainability counseling. And we represent companies across industries, from large companies, Fortune 100, 500 companies, down to individuals and startups and everything in between in all of those areas. The Planetary Lawyer Project is a personal initiative that I have where I share information, job tips, opportunities for doing more climate-friendly legal work, because I didn't start out my legal career. I didn't come right out of law school into the chair of an environmental sustainability law group. I started as a junior associate who knew nothing about climate or sustainability. And I took my practice over a number of years, 6 in fact, really, from a single pro bono volunteer client to a large, thriving national law practice that focuses on climate and sustainability, and is both focused on the subject matters of climate and sustainability, and is the guidepost within a large law firm for businesses that are interested in climate and sustainability. So it's both a subject matter and an industry-focused legal practice. And I wanted to share with people how that was done. How did I do it? Because models and stories always help us see how we can accomplish something that we want to accomplish. And I'm lucky to have learned from very experienced lawyers, both substantively and business development wise. And I'm excited to share not the answers to everything, but the secrets that have helped me to achieve some success. And one of the things that I wanted to offer at the top of this discussion is people think about the big actions, the macro actions, as what drive change. Getting a different job is, I think, one of the big pieces, and we see a lot of questions about that. However, I think that small, tiny micro actions can be so much more impactful, and you don't really need to wait for long periods of time. In fact, micro actions should be taking place in 30 minutes, in a day, in those kinds of things. And that can help to shift the way you feel about your career, the way what you're working on in really concrete, meaningful ways on very short periods of time. And so I want to offer some tips before we get into the webinar itself on how to use micro actions for the biggest climate impact and the biggest impact in your career. And so my first suggestion is to focus, when you're picking a micro action, when you're thinking about what you should do, on how it makes you feel. You want to be excited, sure, but you also want that action to make you feel like something different. You may be in a position where you're doing a specific type of legal work that doesn't relate to climate at all, and going, how do I get from there to climate? And you're viewing yourself maybe as a labor and employment lawyer, maybe as a tax lawyer, maybe as a family law lawyer. What actions can you do that will make you feel like you're a climate lawyer today? And one of the examples I give there is thinking about writing. As someone who is a writer, who considers themselves a writer, someone who has a published book, or someone who has a commitment to write for 30 minutes a day, I think that both of those people are writers. And I think that making those daily commitments to micro actions can make you feel like you've made a huge career change without changing what you do at all, because this is one of my core beliefs, is that any lawyer, no matter their role, no matter their experience level, can work on climate today. I know that may be a bold suggestion, but it's my core belief. I've helped people to do that, in mentorship, and I've done that. So then my other tips are, think about the visibility and impact of the action that you're doing, and try to pick things, design things that have high visibility and high impact. And sometimes that just means talking about a lot about the things that you do. Early in my career, I spent a lot of time on LinkedIn talking about the things I was doing. And it created this culture where people would come to me with those types of questions because I was talking about it publicly. People said, oh, okay, Matt does that. This is what Matt does. And it helped to just create awareness and help people to send me opportunities, even when they were non-paying opportunities, to help me move in that direction. And the other part is the actions that you're doing should be filtered into awards, press coverage, press releases, firm announcements, those kinds of things, because you want to build a bio that will in the future allow clients to come to you for these types of things, or to allow you to show that as a second act lawyer, you can have this expertise and make that kind of a shift. The next piece, if I can get my note page to flip over, is to try to create a feedback loop. And that filters into the prior piece significantly, because when you have a feedback loop, the things you're doing feed itself. Now, posting, talking about what you're doing creates a feedback loop because people come to you. But then also thinking about working on related subject matters so that the action items you're doing are related. Maybe one's in the waste industry and the next one is in a related industry. And so focus on related industries, focus on related tasks, focus on related skills and relationships. Try to create a feedback loop. And the last tip that I want to give is use whatever the role that you have will provide in a very strong way. So for instance, growing up as a young lawyer, pro bono was highly encouraged. So use pro bono to develop climate skills. And we'll make an announcement at the end of this webinar about how we can help you use pro bono. If your firm supports or employer supports going to continuing legal education credits like this, or going to conferences, or being involved in trade groups, use what is available to you to do that. So with those recommendations, signposts on that, we're going to get into the webinar itself. I'm going to do a small bit of housekeeping right now, which one is we are offering CLE credit for this webinar. We are approved in Pennsylvania, Delaware, Illinois, and Georgia. We are dropping a survey in the chat right now, which you must fill out by close of business September 22nd in order to receive CLE credit. If you're seeking credit in one of the states that I just mentioned, then list that on there and you will receive direct credit for this. If you're in New York, New Jersey, or California, we will still provide you credit through an approved jurisdiction policy. You'll get a certificate of attendance. If you're in a different jurisdiction, then you still fill out that form. Basically, if you're seeking CLE credit, fill out that form. We will still send you a certificate of attendance, and you may be able to send it to your local regulatory authority to obtain credit for this event. The other piece that I wanted to mention is that we have two wonderful sponsors for this event. We have Lateral Hub, which is an online marketplace for jobs, for lateral attorney jobs. I know that the Planetary Lawyer Project newsletter sources jobs directly from Lateral Hub so that we can see what's going on. And it's a different way to go about lateral recruiting, where employers and candidates can go right there and see what is there. So we'll see what is available online up to the minute. The other sponsor is Go In-House, which is both a blog and a job board for in-house counsel postings. It is a nationally recognized wonderful resource, and we're very excited to have them as a sponsor for this. We also source jobs for Planetary Lawyer Project newsletter from Go In-House. So it's a resource that we believe in very much. And with that, I'd like to start introducing our panel, which includes Christine Uri, Christine is the founder of ESG for In-House Counsel, where she advises legal leaders on how to improve their company's ESG performance and prepare for the future. She's worked for 10 years as in-house counsel at a company that fights climate change, and as a chief legal officer and a chief sustainability officer. She is also a LinkedIn influencer that puts me to shame. So we're very happy to have her for this. We will be speaking the attendance codes for those dialing in by phone. Thank you for the question. Our next panelist is Aidan Bassett, who is the media co-chair of Law Students for Climate Accountability, which is an excellent organization that vets and provides information on how good are law firms doing on meeting climate mandates and goals, how climate friendly are law firms, and they do a lot of other amazing things. Aidan is a 2L at Georgetown University Law Center. He has done a lot of really interesting things working for the Georgetown Climate Center, and he previously earned his BA in economics from the University of California, Berkeley. He's been in AmeriCorps. We're very happy to have him here, so thanks, Aidan, for joining. And our last guest today is Sangeet Kaur. Sangeet is an impact legal roles recruiter with Pro Lawyers ESG. She has 30 years basically of experience in the legal community. She understands legal recruitment needs for law firms, in-house legal teams, and in ESG, sustainability, and business and human rights roles. I'm so excited to have Sangeet as part of this because she is actually placing people in jobs relating to law and ESG at this very moment. And this is such a niche area that we're seeing. So, Sangeet is also an affiliate member of the Institute of Recruitment Professionals, and she loves engaging with candidates. She's also about to launch a huge collaboration with an established legal recruiting consultancy to trailblaze in the ESG arena. So thank you all for joining today. I'm going to start by looping back to the top of the webinar and talking about what micro action would you recommend to the attorneys that are watching right now? And let's start with you, Christine.
Oh, thank you. Such a great question. I built my sustainability expertise all through action. I do not have any academic background in sustainability. I did not think about it in law school. And for me, it really just started when I began a new job at a company that was dedicated to decarbonization, and I put my hand up for what was an ESG planning volunteer group. And most companies either have some kind of green team or ESG planning group or sustainability group that is volunteer. And by putting your hand up for that kind of thing, you're showing your interest, and you will also be connecting with others in the company who are interested in the same subject. So you'll get to meet kind of who the players are in your company. You would be amazed at how things will kind of roll from there, particularly right now. I can tell you a lot of companies are going to be surprised by the increasing requests for ESG data and information, and really what they're going to have to do to comply. So now is a fantastic time to just put your hand up in your company and make sure people are aware that you are interested in this subject and willing to be helpful.
Excellent, thank you. I love the focus on community in that, because I think that's one of the things about micro action that helps. If you can do a micro action that helps you into a community, that always makes you feel better. Sangeet, what about you? What would you recommend?
Yes, quite the same as what Christine has already said. I wasn't an ESG recruiter or a specialist recruiter about 2 years ago. So I've been doing this only for a year and a half. And how I sort of built my niche. It is really about building a tribe. And I make it a point to read a lot and contact people that who have written an article. So I connect with people, use LinkedIn a lot. So I make sure I have an allies with me, and that's it, basically. I mean, in terms of every day, it's about connecting with people. And Matthew, a little bit about what you said as well at the beginning. It's making it known out to people out there. So being visible, making some noise, really.
You got to make that noise. And I love you're sort of speaking to a category of micro actions also, which is gathering information. And that's a whole category, you know, getting into community, gathering information. It is possible to brainstorm and categorize in these different sections. Aidan, I know you're coming at this from a different perspective as a 2L who's launching a career. So what would you suggest as a good micro action?
Well, I think you guys have already touched on a great many of the critical features of building community and network. I think Matt and Sangeet talking about the power of LinkedIn and getting different perspectives, and Christine within people's own firms. I would say to contribute to the building of a professional network centered around climate issues and with an eye towards getting more information and a diversity of perspectives, professional organizations can be a great resource for just flows of information, whether they be job opportunities or, you know, emergent information from new statutes, new litigation, just to kind of keep the pulse of where climate policy is getting made and where climate issues are salient. And I think to a certain extent, lawyers have an impetus on them, an onus on them to reach beyond the legal profession and use their kind of disproportionate levels of information about how institutions work to find out about things like insurance and finance, which are the other huge players in an energy transition and a climate transition. And I think we'll speak to eventually a kind of diversity of practice areas, whether they be tax and labor, as Matthew's talked about, kind of finding the intersectional ways that may be more specific to you and your firm or your role to link together different issues and different perspectives to find a multiplicity of options.
Yeah, and I love that frame, and we're going to dive deeper into all of those issues. There's one specific point I want to follow up on there with, but before we do, we're going to pop up the first of our CLE codes, and I'll read it out for those of you who are on the phone. So it is B3E A8V. B3E A8V. So we'll leave that up on the screen for a second. But then, you know, Aidan, to pick on one point that you were just talking about, one of the questions we got from attendees, which, by the way, as we're going, if people have additional questions, please drop them in the Q&A. We'll get to them if we can. And if we can't, I'll follow up with you afterward to try to answer your question as best we can. But one of the questions that we received in advance was, how can lawyers network effectively in climate spaces? And I think you touched on this a little bit in your response right now of there are intersecting industries that are really important, and also a lot of trade groups and different organizations that are involved in the climate space. Can you speak to your experience, any tips you have for lawyers networking effectively in climate spaces?
I'll say about law students for climate accountability that, particularly as the media chair, one of the things I've found is how much people are passionate about these issues without a clear outlet to signal that to other people. So my co-chair and I, several weeks back, wrote a piece about the duty of law students to play a central role in transitioning the legal industry off fossil fuels for Bloomberg law. And one of the things I was struck about the reaction from people on LinkedIn was how many people's first response to the article was, I wish I knew how to get involved. And subsequent comments on those same threads were people posting job opportunities or saying, my firm would be happy to recruit someone like you. So I think we've already touched on it, but there's, you can't say too much about the power of social media to offer people potentially overnight connections, if not into new professional roles and opportunities, even again, just professional organizations or nonprofits where someone with legal expertise could offer pro bono time or energy and kind of get a lay of the land for a particular policy niche or practice area that they may not be in at the moment, but could have visibility into just through a few connections very, very quickly over LinkedIn and other professional platforms like that.
So Christine, I think I'm going to kick it to you next, because you're welcome to answer any specific parts of this question, but I think you might have some great insight on how LinkedIn can be leveraged in that way.
Yeah, absolutely. I've been posting actively on sustainability issues on LinkedIn for 2.5 years now, and it has been, just an amazing journey. I was very surprised at how quickly a little network kind of mushroomed up to support me. And I was doing this while chief legal and sustainability officer in that role until June. So I had a full-time job, more than full-time in addition, but I just really loved it. And now, when you look, if you follow my post on ESG, I do some on just my personal, you can see some dog pictures and stuff as well. But if you follow my post on ESG, you'll see in the comments a lot of folks that show up that are very interested, that are really good to engage with. So if you engage with those folks in the comments, you'll start building a little network and know who's out there doing this work.
Yeah, and I think for just to speak to the opportunities as someone who uses LinkedIn a lot, I have gotten clients, lots of clients through LinkedIn. I mean, it's what I use to reach the masses as much as possible. And so posting regularly on LinkedIn about sustainability, climate, whatever sub area that is, whether it's renewable energy, food waste, all these things that I love to nerd out about, large private equity firms, large developers find me through LinkedIn because of that. So it is both a social community thing and an actual place where I think you can meet clients. Sangeet, I think you might, think about this a little bit differently, particularly possible with your intersection with Lawyers for Net Zero, which may have a new name, so you'll have to correct me if I got it wrong. But can you talk a little bit about, to the extent that you would like to, networking effectively in climate spaces?
No, it's quite the same for me as well. I use LinkedIn and I do get work from LinkedIn, it's not, as a recruiter, often people think, well, a recruiter, they're just going to post about jobs out there. But I make it a point to actually educate as well and put out articles which are new, what's happening in different jurisdictions. This came out really because a lot of the candidates that I started speaking to when I first got into specialist recruitment always used to ask me, so where do I get in the information? So I thought, as a recruiter, I don't just want to get roles out there and do sort of a role filling exercise, but also to actually nurture them and mentor them in a way to make sure that they are getting into the right spaces. So I try to lead by example. So I always tell the candidates, definitely be on LinkedIn. There's also that fear that why would anyone want to link in with me, because I don't know anything about climate change now. But you have to start somewhere, and you can try to find peers or other people who have commented, not necessarily speakers who are senior. You can always look and research within organizations who are people who are within a team, and try and connect with them. And I think because we're all a community of like-minded individuals, people do want to connect and grow. So that's sort of my input into this. Now, Lawyers for Net Zero, if we could come back to that, yes, they're now called General Counsel Sustainability Leaders. Excellent.
I know that's a wonderful organization. So if you'd like to know more, reach out to Sangeet to get some more information at the end of this this webinar. The other piece about networking effectively that I want to offer from my experience is, I think that going into smaller ponds, I guess micro is the theme so far of my comments on this, but finding niche areas where you can network rather than trying to go to a huge green biz conference or a huge sustainability conference, finding small groups where you can network will, one, show your commitment to whatever area you're involved in. And an example that I give a lot of times, so if you follow me on the Planetary Lawyer Project, you're probably bored of this example, is I started in one of the sectors that I was focused on was food waste recycling, and specifically food waste composting. Very small niche group. I had loyalty, visibility, community, tribe, all of those things. And I didn't really have to be worried about being pigeonholed as a compost lawyer, although some people thought of me as a compost lawyer, because it allowed me to transition into other things and build skills and build credibility in the climate space. So I would say get as specific as you can, because it'll let your skills, passion, all those things come out, and don't worry about it keeping you pigeonholed. These are all relatable skills. So I know we're talking a lot about skills and networking, and many of you probably came here to hear about jobs. So we'll switch over to that now for a second, which is we're going to try to provide you insights into opportunities focused on ESG, climate, and what the job market looks like. So Sangeet, I'm going to throw it back to you to start us off there.
Right. I guess I speak best about the UK scene. So I'll just share with you what I've been tracking and seeing. I keep a sort of a survey of the roles out there, because obviously I don't have all the roles landed on my desk. So there are roles out there and I keep tabs on them. And what I've been seeing appearing lately are regulatory and compliance roles. So in the ESG and sustainability space. That's one. Then there are renewable energy vacancies. There are vacancies, and this is something I've worked on recently with some of my clients, environmental litigation. So in the UK, litigation has picked up. Some of you would already know of Client Earth and everything that they do in the litigation space, but there are also, of course, lots of small non-profits working with law firms who are also now litigating. So yes, there's a demand growing for litigation lawyers. And sort of the other thing and the conversations that have been happening with my clients lately is the big thing about greenwashing. So the teams are now talking about, yes, how do we beef up the skills in this area? Everybody wants to make sure that whatever business projects out there, they walk the talk, they do, so that they don't get caught out for greenwashing. So these kind of roles are appearing. Now that's the lawyer roles, but I also see operational roles appearing. So there are a lot of law firms that are talking about beefing up their knowledge management teams. It's impossible for lawyers and legal teams to have all the knowledge. So you need the backup support, and these professional support lawyers and knowledge lawyers are needed. So they are growing, and they're specialist lawyers now for ESG. I see the advertisements out there for knowledge manager ESGs. And I also have seen business development roles specific in these niche subject areas. Yeah,
that's really fantastic, and I think I've seen some similar roles in the US. So I think that these are, very UK specific things, but also trends that we're seeing overall. I know there are also things that I'm seeing expanding in my own practice. Focus on greenwashing litigation, focus on renewable energy, all of those, a lot of those different pieces, and companies wanting to have more of a knowledge base around ESG and climate, and looking to experienced lawyers, whether in-house or outside, to provide that. Christine, you were, senior counsel at an in-house position for a while, so you probably did a lot of hiring. And I know that you're in a transition period into your new, consultancy right now. So you're probably seeing some interesting perspectives on this too.
Yeah, absolutely. There is a lot happening in the sustainability space. And I think the very good news for anybody who wants to get into this space is it's really only going to grow from here, particularly as it relates to climate. I mean, the climate crisis is unfortunately not going away anytime soon. And then, what you're seeing in terms of regulatory action is very significant. So you have the CSRD, which is the main European regulation that's coming out, which will impact companies outside of Europe, including a lot in the US that are not aware of it. You have a new California regulation on climate disclosure that is going to be coming out. And you have to understand that all of these regulations, they're not just impacting the regulated companies. They have a tail end that flows down through the supply chain, because in order to report, the regulated companies have to collect information from their supply chain. So, you're seeing in really any B2B business of a significant size is already receiving a ton of questionnaires on their sustainability practices, requests for their footprint, requests for their plans on how they're going to reduce, and also contractual provisions. So it's going to kind of be a big wave over at least the next decade, and now is a great time to jump in, because that is only going to continue to grow. In terms of where to look for a job, I see a couple different options. One is you have a lot of companies that are in the sustainability space, whether it's renewables or technology. There's a lot of SaaS companies. There's a lot of people who are trying to address this market and the market need directly. You could find quite a few in the startup space. So if you're interested in startups, looking at positions in startups for companies that are working on the energy transition, sustainability, climate change, there are a lot that are really rapidly growing in that area. And then there are also some more mature companies, of course, that you could look for a role. That's what I did. I started at a company that had already been operating for 12 years in sustainability, and that was back in 2013. So, there are companies that are bigger, more mature in the space that you could look for a role into. And from an in-house perspective, I can tell you, I never once hired an in-house attorney that actually had experience in the sustainability space. I hired attorneys that had basic commercial experience, preferably in contracting, although I had hired attorneys with a litigation background as well. The industry experience, at least for me in hiring for the roles that I had, was much less important than just the basic legal skills, because I could teach industry and what our business does faster than the legal skills. So you can look for a place that's directly in the industry. The other side to it is really the companies that aren't in the industry but will be impacted. And this is largely through a compliance mechanism. So as I said, companies are being asked for this data, they're being asked to report. Some of them are going to be subject to these regulations. So there's a substantial compliance aspect to this, where really any company is going to be impacted by it. And larger companies are adding compliance roles specifically in this area, or compliance roles that have a portion of their job in this area. And that's a trend that's really going to continue to pick up. So those would be, from an in-house perspective, two different pools of jobs that are growing right now.
That was such a great answer, which touched on so many things that I'm seeing across industries. Was an interview that I did recently with the assistant general counsel at one of the largest wind developers in the United States. And he said one of the same things you said is, I don't hire most people with energy, experience. I hire people who have the hard skills that I need that can be translated into the energy space. And I think that shows one of the pieces you're talking about is there are jobs that substantively work on climate and ESG, and there are jobs that support climate and ESG companies. And climate and ESG companies need everything. They need contracts, they need labor and employment, they need tax. I know that I do that or not necessarily me individually, but through my firm, I do that for large solar developers, handling labor and employment, handling contracting, handling litigation, providing a touch point where it all still gets filtered through climate interests. It all still gets filtered through climate enthusiasm. So it's the mix of whatever subject matter you have specifically and where you can offer that expertise. Aidan, I love that we have so many different perspectives on this. So as someone who's entering the job market, Are there trends that you're seeing in more junior positions? I know you're only a 2L, but would love to see anything that you're looking at or seeing or hearing.
Yeah, so I feel like the thing that's standing out to me in Matt, your comment, and also Christine, yours, is how much people don't need to be changing their practice areas very much, their standard expertise, to just apply it to the firms that are leading this transition and to take kind of existing expertise to new contexts. And I think I'm thinking in part about Louise's question in the chat about a college senior and their perspective. And I was thinking of my own as very much an autodidact on energy issues, on the policy landscape. And I would really encourage people to take advantage of what already exists. So I think it's worth considering that, particularly in the last few years, in the wake of major legislation, for instance, like the Inflation Reduction Act, the kind of policy landscape across a lot of different industries who are encountering new tax treatment, new subsidies, is really changing pretty sharply. But a lot of the core of the green transition has been in the work for decades at this point. And so I think I follow, for instance, Jesse Jenkins on Princeton, and we've been following each other for quite some time at this point. And the thing that strikes me about reading the work of thought leaders like that is how diffuse their understanding can be, how many different practice areas it can touch on, and how many people they can connect you to without meaning to. So for instance, Tim Latimer, who's the founder of Fervo Energy, has just really brought some incredible breakthroughs in geothermal technology to the fore, and kind of educated me a lot through his social media presence and kind of coverage of the industry in just how much it's going to explode in the next few years. And to Christine's point, the people they're going to need are conventional compliance type roles. They're going to need to run businesses well, like everyone else. And those businesses will be providing, carbon-free energy. They will be the cornerstone of a decarbonized grid, a decarbonized world. But they're going to need to be running standard businesses. So I think of people trying to get their foot in the door, or kind of complementing the network side of things with trying to become, if not a thought leader yourself, then at least kind of fundamentally literate in what a broad array of businesses might be doing. So you could come into an interview well prepared to speak kind of intelligently about the kind of work a firm, maybe a startup, is doing. I would say following people in areas of interest or key parts of the green transition where you think that kind of business model might really suit your skills would be fantastic. And for me, it's been as easy as following, a couple hundred different scholars in this area on Twitter and just regularly reading the kind of research they're getting into, the kinds of firms they're promoting as real leaders in this space, new renewables projects. And so I've been able to educate myself a lot on things like energy policy before even taking my first course in it this semester.
That's great. And just to give a concrete example of something that you talked about, I have a friend who was a government compliance attorney who focused on political corruption compliance. Without any additional experience or anything like that, he is now a government compliance attorney focusing on solar incentive compliance, right? So it's taking one set of skills. And I know we got a question in the Q&A about, sometimes these hiring managers are only looking for renewable energy skills, but the truth really is the proliferation of these jobs, because they are proliferating, there's no talent pool to fill it with renewable energy experience. There just isn't. And I think that gets into another question that we've got from our audience previously is, how do you get around not having climate experience? And Aidan, I think you just answered this really well through what you said. And this gets into, do we need certifications? How does it go? I think that the space is evolving so quickly that you don't need certifications. You don't need prior experience to get started. I'm not going to be hired to do a large renewable energy transaction if I don't have experience. but that doesn't mean I can't find a foothold in renewable energy to do something. Like to take my example, my first thing in renewable energy was doing a very narrow piece of litigation that I really didn't need any renewable energy experience for, and just needed my prior experience as a law clerk in the appellate division in New Jersey, and as someone who litigated several cases. And I said, okay, well, now I can do this. That gave me the foothold to have experience with the concepts, the programs. I parlayed that, to go back to the feedback loop of something I said in the beginning, into sitting on a board of an industry group that was involved in this. So it's not necessarily about, if you think that you don't have climate experience and that's going to keep you out, there's always a crack in the door. It's kind of like, because there's always a crack, and finding that crack. Christine, you want to jump in on that?
Yeah, I don't see the question, but if there's something particular about renewable energy, as somebody who worked at a company that did renewable energy, I can tell you, then if you're hiring for a lead on those projects, what you're primarily looking for is project finance experience, because whether it's, renewable or not energy, what you're doing with those projects is very complicated project finance experience, and that's quite critical. And there's not a lot of people who have it. So if you build up or have that experience, it should be very transferable into a renewable context.
Yeah, exactly. So Aidan, I think you've already answered this question, but Sangeet, do you want to offer it? Go ahead.
Yeah, just want to say that till date, I have not seen a single job description which has requested or mandated for certain certifications or qualifications. And I think hiring managers know that these roles, a lot of them are new, they are evolving. So everything you said, Aidan, there, and Christine, a lot of it is transferable skills. For example, with the civil litigation example that I mentioned, you need to know the civil procedure rules if you're going to environmental litigation. So it's all there in our training and skills as lawyers. It's just how we apply it to a particular industry, if you're in a company or within a law practice, whichever department you're in.
That's really great. And so one of the questions we got in advance, I'm gonna piggyback on that, because what they asked was, how conducive is a law firm environment to this type of practice? And I know I have a very specific thought process on that, which is, I think, because people usually think about climate and sustainability as, you work for the government or you work for a nonprofit, and that's how you do climate and sustainability, really. But as Christine said in one of her answers a couple minutes ago, the number of companies that are focused on this, the number of startups, is growing so substantially. And I'm a big proponent of, this is possible to do at any law firm. And so I think it is probably the most conducive thing at a law firm, because law firms by their nature are kind of very distributed. There's not very much top-down control necessarily. There's a very clear hierarchy, but I find that there's a lot of flexibility, especially in our post-pandemic lifestyle, to do things and to have your own time. Law firms accept pro bono. You can do climate pro bono. I was able to make a slow transition over 6-7 years to having no climate clients to a thriving, very large national climate practice. And I didn't change my role right away, right? Like, I didn't step into an environmental sustainability role right away. It took me 5.5 of those 6 or 7 years to get to the point where it was ready to make that switch. It was 1%, 5%, 10%. But the steady, constant work of a law firm gave me a baseline with which to make those pivots. Aidan, I'm going to throw it to you next on this, because I think through Law Students for Climate Accountability, you may have a very interesting thought process on how conducive are law firms for this.
Yeah, I am glad to get a chance to talk about this. As some of you may know, if you're familiar at all with Law Students for Climate Accountability, or even if you're not, our flagship product every year is a ranking of the Vault 100 firms according to our assessment of their complicity in the climate crisis, which largely translates to how much fossil fuel representation they do, their clients, their litigation, their lobbying work. And I think one could take from that, I think incorrectly, that our view is firms are destined to be the culprits, as Matt says, that the only way to work in climate is in government or in the NGO world. And I really don't think that's true. In fact, I think quite the opposite is true. It is, I think, particularly critical for people at large or even medium-sized firms anywhere in the country to, as Matt says, create the marginal difference. So a lot of things we hear anecdotally from attorneys at large firms who want to do more climate accountable work, but are at firms where the energy practice area is largely representing fossil fuel interests, is that there isn't a partner taking the lead in this space. There isn't anyone who's looking to bring on new renewable business. And so if they want to stay at their firm but work more in a climate accountable way, they don't have as many options as they'd like. And I think people will find in increasing years, as Christine and Sangeet and Matt have all said, the transition here is huge. The money here, I think we haven't discussed very much, but the financing, to Christine's point about project finance, is really moving towards renewable energy. So I think the role we believe people can take in private practice is to push for internal change in client acquisition practices, even just on the margin at their firms, and also look to create as much as possible, take on new clients, drive new business in these huge burgeoning array of green firms, whether it's in technology, green financing, and provide a place where other people with shared climate interests at your firm can go and express that interest. And I think a huge change in culture has to be driven by people encountering it from their peers. If you don't know that there's any kind of opportunity to work in climate at your firm, you may not be inclined to talk about that interest with your peers at your firm. And so that shared awareness that those opportunities exist and the interest is there, importantly, needs to filter from the bottom up. So particularly for young attorneys, kind of expressing the intensity of that interest and demand for climate positive work, for renewable clients, needs to drive business in that direction. And I think it will be really critical, in particular for attorneys at firms, to be the ones driving change in practice areas, in clients at their firms, and creating an opportunity for people to transition to, not just something they have to say no to, but things they can say yes to and be affirmatively a part of.
That's really fantastic, and I'm glad that we got that opportunity to have you share that. I think one thing is that a lot of that relates. There's a couple questions in the Q&A from second act lawyers, very experienced lawyers. I think a lot of this still applies. I think that the process is really the same. Find small ways to get involved in these things. Find small ways to drive change. I promise you, there is something that you can do today to start moving more in this direction. And it's probably not getting a new job. It's probably not, changing a role entirely. But there's some newsletter you can follow, some group you can get involved in, some article you can write, some volunteer work you can do, some pro bono client. There's something you can do today. And I want to shift gears a little bit and talk about something we haven't really yet, which is, I think we've talked about this a lot from the private lawyer perspective, but in-house lawyers. And Christine, I'm going to come to you first on this one. If you're not in an ESG role as an in-house lawyer, what are some best practices, or, how do you incorporate climate and ESG into a non-climate in-house role?
Yeah, well, first, recognize very few companies are going to have an in-house legal position that's fully dedicated to climate and ESG. I'm seeing more and more of them, but they're really at large companies that have quite a bit of work in this area. what typically happens is that it'll be a portion of somebody's job on the legal team. It may or may not be a compliance person, and it is usually the person who puts their hand up and says they're willing to do it. So it's a kind of very open field in companies in terms of just finding people who like to do particular kinds of work. This is just great general in-house advice as well as for sustainability, but it is critical to reach out to other functions and groups across the organization and find out what their perspectives are on sustainability and where they're coming from, and build a network within your organization. For example, sales, make some friends in sales. You're probably working with them anyway. And understand what they're seeing from the client side. What kind of requests are they getting from the client side? What are their perspectives on how the company needs to move on ESG in general? Reach out to your marketing folks, see what competitors are doing, or if they're definitely know what's on your company website, whether or not you're interested in ESG or sustainability, know what your company is putting out there on this from just a basic compliance standpoint. You can kind of be surprised sometimes, which isn't particularly great, but it happens. But understand, where your marketing team is going. Make a BFF in finance, and that is at your level. They'll find somebody, it doesn't have to be the CFO, but somebody's at your level that is interested in this subject, and find out, hey, what is the finance team thinking about this? What kind of direction are you going? Are folks interested in it? But creating a network of people across your organization in different areas will serve you in many ways. And if you want to make change in your organization in this subject, it will be absolutely critical.
Thanks so much, Christine. I think that's great. Sangeet, do you want to offer anything on that point?
If I could just say something about private practice roles, that cross-functional collaboration, Christine, that you spoke about, I think there's less opportunity for that in private practice roles, because usually when you are assigned to a particular department, you are, you have to keep up with your billing targets and so on. So doing something outside of your role is a little harder. And some of the candidates that I speak to who are looking for roles actually come to me and say that there's just not enough climate or environmental work. That's why I'm looking. Yes, that is an issue. And I think, Aidan, you mentioned that sometimes it's always good to get the message through bottom to the top. So if the younger lawyers can go to the seniors and say that, look, I want to do something different, or how can we talk to our clients about considering climate considerations in their business, that might help. But very often, I think some law firms, the way they are structured, it's a little bit difficult for junior lawyers or even midterm lawyers to try and make some waves.
Yeah, it definitely can be, and I know that's one of the reasons I have an open door policy and an open group policy. Really, anyone who wants to work on climate or environment, we have a monthly meeting.
Excellent.
You come, you join. I will find you work. There's plenty of it to do, and you have plenty of skills. So, before we keep moving, we're going to give our second and last CLE code. So it will pop that up on the screen now for a second. And that's the second code is HAG AHU. Second code is HAG AHU. And so, unfortunately, we are coming to the end of our time together. And someone just put in the Q&A a reference to the Chancery Lane project which creates climate-friendly contract clauses, and great resource. So I'm going to drop that in the chat. so that everyone can see that and have access to it. But it's a fantastic resource. This is a specific announcement from Chancery Lane, but please check that out for any contracting things. Very quickly, yes, Sangeet.
No, just to say about the Chancery Lane project. It was only this week that they announced they've worked on 10 new climate contract clauses, which U.S. attorneys can use for getting their clients to decarbonize. So just wanted to put that in as well. So they have gone a little bit US and got these 10 new clauses as well.
And we were getting a request to post the CLE form again. We're going to post the CLE form again right now. But that Chancery Lane project is fantastic, and I know I use it for when I have to do climate contracting. So as we wrap up, we just dropped the survey in the chat again for the CLE codes. Please, as we said, get that in by September 22nd, close of business. That's Friday, so that we can get ours out by that time. We're very grateful that you guys have all joined this webinar with us. And the next webinar that we're going to be having will be in January 2024, so just a couple months away, and it's going to focus on climate pro bono skills. So it's going to be a longer webinar and a more skills-based webinar, and it's going to provide you the skills that you need to confidently tackle and take on climate pro bono cases. I know that I am always willing and eager to take on new projects. Like, I got an outreach from a friend who needed help with a founders agreement in connection with a climate startup. I had no idea how to deal with a founders agreement at that time, because not being a startup, or really engaged in startups that much at that time. But I took it on. I found the resources. I watched the CLE. I went through all that, but I had to go through that process. And I know everyone isn't always as willing to put themselves out on a ledge like that. And so we want to make sure that if you want to do climate pro bono, which I think a lot of you probably do, that we give you all the resources you need to hit the ground running. So it's going to be a very condensed session where we're going to give you the key skills that you really need to start helping climate companies and causes right away. And you can go do that confidently. Because for me, as I said at the outset, my first climate client was a pro bono client. That was where I started to where I am today. And I credit it with making me feel like I'm having an impact immediately, not having to wait, because even if I can't get a paying client or a different job, you can always get someone to let you do something for free. And so, with that, we are so grateful to all of you for attending. To have 160 attorneys live here today virtually, with more, probably watching this in recording. You're having an impact by being part of this community, by being here today, and we're so grateful to have you. So thank you, everyone. Thank you to our panelists. Thank you to our sponsors, Lateral Hub and Go In House. Everyone have a beautiful day.
Thank you.